away from Europe to Asia Minor, North Africa and the Antilles, Panama and South America, as well as Equatorial Africa and beyond. The French had earmarked Dakar as a port of refuge for battle flotilla in the ocean. It was also intended to be a bridge between the French ports in the North Atlantic, the English channels, and the Mediterranean for the unity of combat by the French Navy. Dakar was admirably placed to combine her action with Brest and the Fort-de-France. Like Sierra Leone, Dakar was intended to be an alternative gateway to the Far East in case of the closure of the Suez Canal. These considerations made the French to build a naval base in Dakar from 1898. She served as a base for anti-submarine campaign against Germany in the First World War. The significance of Dakar in the face of threats to France in the interwar years was, in French perception, to continue undiminished because, as they put it in French, dans le grand conflit européen de l'avenir, Dakar durera un rôle plus important encore que pendant la dernière guerre. That is, in the great European conflict of the future, Dakar will play a role which is more important again than she did during the First World War. For this reason, the French took steps to facilitate the maximum production of West African resources to assist France in case of trouble. And the Dakar naval base, which the French called Point d'appui, was, to put it in French, ce point d'appui doit être considéré en raison de l'action comme faisant partie d'opérations européennes. That because of the importance of Dakar, it should be seen as a theater of European operation, even though it is located in Africa. It was through Dakar that France obtained supplies in 1917-1918 during the period of submarine warfare from Australia. Dakar was expected to fulfill the same function in future war. She was to be France's only point of escape from the danger of submarine warfare. As a result of her strategic location, Dakar was to be the base for transporting men and materials to France. She was to be, in case of another war, the base of operations of vessels charged with maintaining the security of French communications with West Africa and South America. In case of mobilization, Dakar was to be refuge au niveau de commerce de plus en plus nombreux qui fréquentent les parages d'un port, donc une loi d'août 1920 prévoit une extension belle sur les eaux économiques comprendra l'AOF avec la culture intensive de coton, because the French envisaged a heavy dependence on cotton production from West Africa, because in their own estimation, other sources of cotton for the French textile industry were likely to be untenable for reasons that will be clear now. Dakar's defense was to be rated as very important because French national interests, to put it as they put it in French, oblige à défendre Dakar en raison de son rôle comme base de départ des forces noires, base d'opération navale et de port de refuge, denrées pour la métropole, et de protection indirecte de l'AOF for the protection of French West Africa itself. The increased strategic importance of Dakar in post-World War French thinking in the face of perceived threats made the Conseil supérieur de la défense nationale to classify it as a first-class naval base which should be organized along the same line as naval bases in metropolitan France, in the metropole itself. The various defense arrangements made by the French to enable Dakar to play its vital role in the strategic calculation of the French to combat all eventualities of threats have been discussed elsewhere. It is therefore enough to note that even during the period of cordial relations with the British, their only neighbor in West Africa, the French did not neglect the defenses of Dakar. This was because the base was intended to serve some roles in the strategic plans of the sub-region, for which considerations were beyond West Africa. The French also had defended all ports over West Africa. The French also had defended ports all over West Africa in locations such as Conakry in Guinea, Abidjan, and Point Noir, as well as auxiliary substations at Douala to meet likely threats. All these were built between 1923 and 1935. In addition to its economic resources and strategic location, France also hoped to tap the immense manpower resources of West Africa in the face of German threats and anxiety over a likely recurrence of another war on the magnitude of the First World War. Plans were made to this end right through the 1920s. The French had exploited West African manpower for military labor from time immemorial. The excessive demands of France from West Africa in this regard had provoked a universal revolt against France in our West African colonies during the First World War. However, as a result of the demographic disadvantage of France after the First World War, the French also hoped to rely very heavily again on African manpower resources to perform certain functions for which the French had no alternative means of performing. The French suffered very heavy casualties in the First World War. Moreover, among the provisions of the 1919 peace settlement was the clause providing for the occupation of the Rhineland by Allied forces, the bulk of which were French. France therefore needed a lot of manpower, and this made their dependence on West Africa inevitable. France deployed the tirailleurs sénégalais, as the French-speaking West African soldiers were known, as part of the Army of Occupation to the Rhineland for garrison duties in metropolitan France itself, as well as Syria and North Africa. French West African troops were also used to suppress revolts in other parts of the French Empire. France therefore found the black troops indispensable, like the preparation of French West African resources and the defense of Dakar to meet French needs in time of emergency. Series of inspection tours of the tirailleurs sénégalais were held to prepare the force for its important role in the French defense calculations. One of such was held by Marshal Pétain, the president of the Conseil Comité Colonial CCDC, that is Committee for Colonial Defense, Committee Colonial de Defense, and as the Inspector General of Colonial Troops in 1925. In his report, Pétain reminded the French government of the threat facing the French nation and the role assigned to French West Africa as veritable reservoir of men. He counseled the establishment of a scheme for the systematic recruitment of French West Africans in peacetime so as to have a steady strength under arms in case of a new conflict. France should aim at a permanent black army of 80,000 men. The Inspector General alluded to a ministerial dispatch of 1920 to this effect and the projection for the recruitment of between 12, 15, and 20,000 men to achieve this target annually. The target had not been realized due to a number of problems which should be urgently solved. Although Pétain did not elaborate on the very important role meant for French black African troops, African contingents later, the Inspector General, in reiterating the need for the amelioration of the condition of service of the tirailleurs sénégalais, threw more light on this when he said, il n'est pas sans intérêt d'insister à nouveau sur l'important point que pouvons-nous apporter les contingents d'Afrique noire en cas de besoin. Apart from local garrisoning and defense duties in West Africa, the tirailleurs sénégalais, in the words of the Inspector General of Colonial Troops, constituent en partie les troupes de souveraineté que nous entretenons sous les théâtres d'opérations extérieures et dans certaines de nos possessions d'outre-mer, Afrique du Nord, Syrie, Madagascar, et Guyane et Somalie. French West African forces also constituent la composition des forces mobiles prêtes à intervenir en tout point de notre empire où l'ordre français vient se trouver menacé. That is, the French West African troops, while troops of sovereignty to be dispatched to any point on the globe where French colonial order was threatened. Apart from this role, the French, the tirailleurs sénégalais also contribute de l'automne de paix à fournir à la métropole les effectifs nécessaires à sa défense. That is, even in time of peace, the tirailleurs sénégalais also constitute a body of troops to be sent to France itself, to police it, and to defend the metropole itself. This reliance on the West African manpower was only heightened by the 1935 threat with the turn of events in international relations and in Germany in particular. In the French plans for mobilization, drawn up in 1937, France looked forward to recruiting 178,000 men from West Africa in the first year of the war. This was in addition to the recruitment of both skilled and unskilled labor from West Africa. The implementation of this policy made France to have a large body of black African troops under arms on the outbreak of the First World War. As can be seen from above, even though it's not much is said about this, France has been very heavily indebted to the French West African countries in several regards. And so it was an irony of history that the French government could be accusing French West African countries of ingratitude, when in actual fact, from time immemorial, it's France that have been heavily indebted to these French West African countries. In subsequent recording, we will show French near total dependence on some other African agricultural materials. This will be the beginning of a series of emissions and transmission for the enlightenment of French-speaking West African, former French West African colonies, to know that they have done more than being grateful, being the pillar of support and strength for France in times of emergency. Thank you very much.